You keep calling yourself lazy. You look at your unfinished tasks, your neglected goals, your shrinking energy, and all you feel is shame. A silent, dull kind of shame that wears your name but doesn't tell your story. You assume it's a character flaw, a weakness of will. But Carl Jung would have said something very different. He didn't believe in laziness the way we do today. For him, the psyche was purposeful, not efficient, purposeful. And if you're resisting action, if you're stuck in patterns of avoidance and fatigue, it might not be because you're lazy. It might be because your soul doesn't see the point. The human psyche does not move toward productivity for the sake of movement. It moves toward meaning, toward wholeness. And when that meaning is absent, when your daily actions don't align with who you truly are, something inside you withdraws. Something in you shuts down. You start to lose energy, not because you lack discipline, but because your unconscious knows this is not your path. This is not your truth. Jung believed that we become ill, emotionally, spiritually, sometimes even physically, when we ignore the voice of the unconscious, when we silence the parts of ourselves that know better, when we live according to external demands, false ideals, borrowed dreams. So maybe you're not lazy. Maybe you're exhausted from pretending to care about things that don't matter to you, pretending that your goals are yours when they were handed to you by culture, by family, by fear. Pretending that success will bring peace when all it's ever brought you is pressure. Your procrastination is not a failure of effort. It's a symptom of disconnection. You're disconnected from your inner world, from the instincts that once moved you naturally, from the child within you who once acted not from fear, but from desire, curiosity, and truth. But that child is gone now. Or so you think. You've buried them under years of performance, of shoulds, of expectations. Jung would have called this the beginning of shadow. You exile the parts of yourself that don't fit the mask. You suppress your longing, your sadness, your questions, until all that's left is the shell of a person doing what they're supposed to, but not feeling any of it. And your unconscious knows. It always knows. That's why it resists. That's why you can't start. That's why you delay, escape, distract, because deep down you feel the hollowness, and your soul refuses to participate in the lie. We live in a culture that worships productivity, but fears depth. That offers strategies, hacks, and dopamine tricks. Anything to avoid the real question, why are you doing what you're doing? Jung never offered shortcuts. He invited people to go deeper, to ask, is this truly mine? This goal, this life, this version of myself, did it emerge from my own center, or was it handed to me by fear, trauma, or the hunger to be accepted? When you don't know the answer to that question, your body will tell you. Through fatigue, through procrastination, through that numbing feeling that you're drifting through someone else's story. You think you need motivation, but what you really need is truth. Truth about what matters to you. Truth about the things you've been pretending not to feel. Truth about the emptiness that creeps in every time you reach another milestone and still feel lost. Jung believed that healing requires confrontation, not with others, with yourself, with the illusions you've built, with the parts of you that know something's wrong but have been told to stay quiet. So when you sit in front of your tasks and feel nothing but heaviness, don't call yourself lazy. Call yourself honest, because something in you refuses to keep living on autopilot. Something in you is waiting for you to stop pretending, to stop chasing a life that doesn't feel like yours. And the moment you listen, really listen to that resistance, it becomes something else. It becomes a guide, a doorway, an invitation to return to what's real. You've spent so long fighting against yourself that you've forgotten how to listen. Every time you force yourself to act, to be productive, to push through, a part of you grows quieter, weaker, further away. That part is not your enemy. It's your truth. It's the part of you that still remembers what it feels like to move with purpose, not pressure. Jung believed that within each of us lives a hidden self, an authentic self, buried beneath the roles we play. This self doesn't respond to guilt or deadlines. It responds to meaning. And when the life you live no longer reflects that meaning, the unconscious begins to resist. That resistance is not failure. It is protest. And every time you call it laziness, you betray it even more. You try to override it with schedules, caffeine, motivational speeches, productivity apps, but none of it works because your problem is not lack of energy. It is a misalignment of direction. You're not moving toward wholeness. You're moving toward survival, and the soul was never built to survive. It was built to express, to create, to love, and when it is reduced to a tool for success, it revolts. Jung knew that the unconscious is not silent. It speaks through dreams, through slips of the tongue, through physical symptoms, and yes, through procrastination. You are not lazy. You are misaligned. You are trying to live a story that isn't yours, and your unconscious knows it. That is why it sabotages you. Not because it hates you, but because it wants you to stop lying, stop pretending, stop living a life that keeps your soul locked in a box. But facing that truth is terrifying because it means you have to give up the false structure. You have to let go of the identity you've spent years building. You have to question everything. And most people won't. Most people would rather call themselves lazy than admit they're lost. They would rather increase the pressure than admit they've been chasing the wrong thing. They would rather suffer than change, because change means stepping into the unknown. It means surrendering the illusion of control. And for the ego, that feels like death. But Jung taught that what feels like death to the ego is often the beginning of life for the soul. This is the process of individuation, the journey of becoming who you really are, not who the world trained you to be. But that journey always begins with a breakdown, a crack in the system, a moment where everything stops working, where effort turns to dust, and you find yourself staring into the void of your own meaninglessness. That is not failure. That is initiation. That is the moment the psyche begins to reclaim itself. You resist work not because you're weak, but because your soul is trying to tell you that what you're working for no longer serves your growth. And you can ignore that voice for a while, but it will return, stronger, louder, more desperate, until you either break or begin to listen. So the question is not, how do I fix my laziness? The real question is, what am I doing that feels dead? What part of my life no longer belongs to me? And what wants to be born in its place? These are dangerous questions. They have consequences, because once you ask them, you can't unsee the answers. You can't go back to pretending. You can't numb yourself with noise. You begin to see how much of your life has been performed, how much of your time has been spent trying to be someone impressive, responsible, likable, productive, but never real. Jung said that we wear masks, personas, to survive in the world, but over time, we forget the face beneath the mask. And when that happens, we suffer. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, invisibly, through avoidance, through fatigue, through the silent wish that someone would just give us permission to stop pretending. But the permission has to come from within. No one will give it to you. The world profits from your self-betrayal. It rewards your performance. It punishes your stillness. And yet, stillness is the only place where you can hear the unconscious. Stillness is not laziness. It is the space where truth emerges. And once you begin to listen to that truth, something shifts. You stop asking how to push yourself harder, and you start asking what's worth moving toward. You stop chasing discipline and start cultivating integrity. You stop living from force and begin living from alignment. And the moment you reconnect with meaning, real meaning, not borrowed purpose, you will find that the energy returns, not all at once, not in a burst, but quietly, like water returning to a dry well. This is not a quick fix. This is the beginning of something slow and difficult and real. It requires courage to admit that the life you've built doesn't nourish you. It requires grief to let it go. But on the other side of that grief is a different kind of life. Not louder, not flashier, but truer. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And maybe, just maybe, your so-called laziness is not a flaw, but a sign that it's time to begin. You've spent years trying to fix what was never broken. You punished yourself for not fitting into a system that never asked who you really were. You called yourself lazy, scattered, undisciplined. You drowned in guilt because you couldn't force yourself to care about things that meant nothing to you. But the truth is, your resistance was the most honest part of you, the part that refused to keep building a life that felt dead inside, the part that said no to the lie. Jung believed that our symptoms are not enemies to eliminate, but messengers to understand. And your procrastination, your avoidance, your apathy, they are not defects, they are signals, warnings, echoes of a deeper intelligence trying to speak. But we don't want to listen, because to listen means we must change, and change is terrifying, not because the new is unbearable, but because the familiar is addictive. We cling to our routines, our personas, our goals, even when they suffocate us, even when they lead us into quiet despair. We fear the void more than we fear misery, but that void, the silence you've been avoiding, is not empty. It's fertile. Jung called it the womb of transformation, the place where the ego breaks down and the self begins to emerge. But you can't think your way into it. You have to descend. You have to let go. This is the path of shadow, the journey you've avoided because it requires you to meet parts of yourself you've denied, the parts you abandoned to survive, the parts that still wait in the dark, hoping you'll return. And when you do, when you step into that space of inner honesty, you begin to feel something unfamiliar, a kind of quiet strength, not motivation, not adrenaline, but alignment. A sense that your actions are no longer forced because they arise from something deeper than fear. That is the beginning of meaning. And with meaning, energy follows. But you must be willing to lose everything that isn't real. You must be willing to disappoint the people who only loved your performance. You must be willing to look at your life and say, this isn't mine. This isn't who I came here to be. And that's when the work begins. Not the outer work, but the inner unraveling, the slow peeling back of layers, the remembering of what you wanted, of what you knew, of who you were before you learned to hide. Jung never promised comfort. He promised truth. And truth, by nature, is disruptive. It burns away the illusions that kept you safe. But once the fire is done, what remains is clean. What remains is real. So how do you start? Not by changing everything overnight. Not by forcing yourself into some ideal version of productivity. You begin by asking one question over and over again. What is mine? Which thoughts are mine? Which desires are mine? Which dreams, hetsas, or behaviors, relationships belong to me, and which were inherited, imposed, absorbed from fear? And every time you feel resistance, ask it what it's trying to protect, what wound it's guarding, what truth it's pointing toward. Because resistance is not an enemy. It is the gatekeeper of transformation. It shows you where the lie lives, and the lie is always this: that you are not allowed to want what you want, that you must earn rest, earn peace, earn worth. But you don't. You never had to. You are not lazy. You are full of unlived truths. You are not broken. You are buried beneath expectations, performance, survival, beneath the pressure to be useful, admirable, fast. And the soul doesn't move fast. The soul moves in spirals, in silence, in symbols. Jung knew this. That's why he spoke in archetypes and dreams, not formulas, because the path to wholeness is not linear. It doesn't follow a schedule, it follows the call. And the call is inside you. Faint, maybe, but real. And it's been waiting, not for a plan, not for permission, for presence. So when you feel the weight again, when your body says no, when your mind slips into avoidance, when the guilt starts rising, don't fight it. Don't push it down. Sit with it. Ask it what it wants you to know. Let it speak. Because that voice, the one you've silenced all your life, is the only one that can lead you home, not to productivity, not to success, to truth. And truth is the only thing that heals. You don't need to become someone else. You need to return to who you were before you forgot, before you became obedient, before you learned to perform instead of feel, to cope instead of live. You don't need more discipline. You need more soul. You need more silence, more honesty, more courage to say, I refuse to spend this life on something that kills me slowly. I refuse to give my energy to a world that never asked who I am. I choose meaning, even if it's messy, even if it's small, even if no one understands, because that is the beginning of a different life. Not louder, not easier, but real, and that is enough.